Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Congresswoman Victoria Spartz. Congresswoman, thank you so much for the time this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start at your announcement last week. You initially said last year you weren't planning to run for re-election. You have since changed your mind. So to start the conversation, can you tell us a little bit about that decision?
Listen, it's never an easy decision being a woman and mother and having children and trying to save the republic at the same time where your duty lies. And I felt that last year that I need to take time off and reinvigorate, spend time more with family and kids, and try to deliver a few things on policies this Congress. Unfortunately, this Congress turned into really drama with not a lot of things, unfortunately, are going to be delivered that I work extremely hard on. And I have a lot of people on the ground being very upset. I felt, that I need to give them a choice of someone who actually will fight for them, not personal agenda. We have too many people in politics like that. And, and then let the people and God decide. So I said, I cannot abandon Republic in these challenging times. And I have to, make, some difference because we're going to have big problems in Washington, D.C.
Your patriotism is apparent just looking at your shirt alone. And I am curious, what are those issues that you think this Congress fell short on?
Well, listen, unfortunately, and, I fought with our speaker a lot. Unfortunately, there are a lot of problems, and it's not really his fault. It's the fault of many Congresses that haven't dealt with these issues. But now they became so material that now we have to pick some of them and start dealing with them. It's border security, it's debt, doing much better strategically with foreign policies. We have a mess everywhere. And I told Speaker, even before after we won the election, even before we started Congress, that let's just pick some big issues. Let's pick the hill to die on it, and we'll take them. Just pick some, and I'll help you. There are some issues that really, I know enough to be dangerous about javelins, but in finances, I spent over a decade in very advanced finances, and I can help a lot of these issues. Well, unfortunately, our previous speaker was really more consumed about, he's kind of a symptom of Washington, D.C., and I fought with him quite a bit. Tried to push him to do some things. At the end, he tried to do some things, but unfortunately for him, a lot of my colleagues decided that it was enough, and we vacated the speaker. Now we got a new speaker who is a very good human being with good ideas and really genuine in his desires to do something good, but he's not used to fight a big machine of the other side, which is very powerful. I never underestimate the other side. They've been organized, strategic, and and we have to do better as Republicans. So I think these big issues unfortunately been punted by this speaker too, and I am not sure if he will have the strength. He says maybe in March. I'm not sure. And I think these issues are very important for American people and will hurt many lives if we're not start dealing with them, at least somewhat proactively, not waiting that major crisis is going to really be destructive for our country.
I do want to talk about those major issues that you plan to work on in just a moment, but you did note when you initially announced that you are running for re-election, you talked about the current failed leadership in Washington. You had some criticisms for McCarthy just now, but I do want to talk about Speaker Mike Johnson. Last week, House Republicans, as you know, failed in their push to impeach DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, and they failed to pass a standalone Israel bill. Are you confident in his leadership?
Well, listen, we always have, and listen, and the biggest failure, it's really of President Biden and Chuck Schumer. I'll be honest with you. I just don't think my Republicans are strong enough and strategic to fight them. It's not they're not trying. But unfortunately, Senator Schumer observed his politics, and President Biden forgot what governing would even means and really playing politics with people's life, and we have to be able to hold the ground. But I'll tell you, we had a discussion last week. I disagreed. We actually on the floor, some conservatives and speaker had a very vibrant debate. Ultimately, he was the leader, has to decide how he's going to govern. I know that hate her or love her, but Speaker Pelosi knew how to count. and we probably could have waited with impeachment because, some people had objections, and I respect, people's objections. We're ultimately freedom-loving Republicans. We're not sheeps like the other sides, so that's fine. We had the vote, when Steve Scalise would be back. So I think we should have waited. And the same, we haven't been dealt properly with the foreign aid and strategically. And, a lot of conservatives had some concerns. It's not about the support of Israel. It's about how we're paying for stuff. And I think he shouldn't have moved that bill. He decided to do it. And I think hopefully it's going to be a good lesson for him that he need to work closely with Republicans and then Democrats in doing suspension bills.
Congresswoman, I feel so privileged that I have the opportunity every week to speak with different members of Congress. I've spoken to Republicans and Democrats, and both have accused the other side of playing politics when it comes to the border. As you know, House Republicans said a bipartisan border bill would be dead on arrival if it reached the House. It failed in the Senate. What do you make of this? Because the border, you mentioned, is a top issue, and right now there's no solve there.
Well, listen, it's not politics on our side. It is a national security issues. And when Democrats telling me that solution is to reform our legal immigration, that is a completely untrue. We need to reform our legal immigration, but we have to secure the border first. And that is something that the responsibility of both parties should be to secure our nation. It shouldn't be political. I said I'm willing to, look how we can have our legal immigration system to serve better our country, and I'm willing to have this discussion. But no, that's not going to resolve now the lawlessness that we created at the border. And we need to make sure that we can put some systems in place to get it under control, because it's going to hurt our country, and we put our country in a big danger by have such an open border. And considering how many wars we're involved with, it's really irresponsible and reckless, for not to deal with this issue. So it's not really politics. I think it would be in their interest to pass some good legislation, because I think American people, I had in-person town halls in my district, for the last months, and this is a number one issues. People from even, I have some more liberal parts of district, not all of them conservative, but no one objected that we need to deal with our border. So it seems like it should be in their interest, because it's an interest of the American people to come together with us. But they don't want to do it, and they just have a different agenda. And I don't think, they want to come together on this issue. I haven't seen it.
What is the solution here? Because the Senate's bipartisan bill is, in fact, bipartisan. It is a compromise, and even the Union for Border Patrol Agents did endorse it. They said this. They called it a, quote, step in the right direction, and is far better than the current status quo. So why is nothing better than that bill?
Well, listen, I actually read the bill, and I've been at the border many times, and recently, a few weeks ago, I understand these guys, boys and girls, are so desperate to have something. They're so tired. So I completely understand the level of exhaustion. And this is a lot of very patriotic Americans that go every day and try to protect country, and they feel helpless. And really, I understand their frustration. They're willing to get at least something. And there are a few pieces of the bill that, not bad. But unfortunately, most of this is not going to deal with this issue. And unfortunately, it's also going to make legitimate some illegal activities, which kind of stupid on the asylum processes. We should never even allow people to cross the border, and not through the legal points of entry. We have to look how we can be doing better adjudication and processing and tighten asylum and parole, and let people go through legal points of entry, but how we can have a mechanism where you have other illegal crossing, that Border Patrol has an ability to deny an entry for people that actually, most of them illegitimately claim an asylum or any other things. Actually 40% not even claiming anything at all anymore. I was surprised. When we went to Del Rio sector, I was like, really? Like, what are we adjudicating if they're not claiming anything? I mean, they just go and a lot of people just through the border. So we have to provide that And unfortunately, that bill had so many loopholes and really was not written with an intent, except few parts, including, was some not on fentanyl, not bad part. I think if that bill would be tightened and they would be willing to work with us, and get something closer to HR 2, that would be something maybe could be workable. But it seemed to me like, they felt like that is the best we can get, and that's not how negotiation works. They have to work with us and make it tougher. We made the proposal, they made the proposal. That is ceiling for the Senate. Our proposal is a ceiling for us, but we need to go up and make it tight and not go even more down to get to convince some of the Democrats on the liberal side too. So I didn't think it was a genuine effort of the Senate to really come to the deal, and it sounds like even a lot of Republicans in the Senate didn't support it.
HR 2 doesn't have any Democrat support in the House. And as you know, government is divided right now. We still have almost half of this Congress's term left. So are we going to see any sort of border security between now and then?
Well, listen, now we're moving into very political time. Things are going to be harder and harder. That's why I said, like, when our speaker says we'll do something in March, and, now appropriations in May on FISA authorization, in October on our Farm Bill reauthorization. I'm not that naive. I've been in politics. I still probably are crazy enough at the age of 45 to believe in good things. You have to have a little bit be crazy and naive. If you would be really, smart and wise, you probably would really think, OMG. But I cannot give up. So I have to believe in some goodness and some good things, but I'm realistic too. And it's going to be harder and harder closer we get to the election to get anything done. And everyone will be consumed now with primaries, with generals and everything else. So I hope maybe our last chance, maybe when we go and, and see how impeachment proceedings go and they get in the Senate, and maybe it's going to be not fresh in the Senate, when people, they will stand hearings. But now I'm not sure if things are going to be moving. I think it's very important, and I'll try to do what I can to put pressure, because we cannot neglect our border. It is number one national security issue right now for our country.
That's the number one issue when I talk to all members of Congress. That's what they say when they come on here. You did mention it is an election year. Do you think, and Republicans have faced criticism for this, that they don't want to give President Biden a win on immigration during an election year? From where you're sitting, do you think that's a valid complaint?
Oh, no, it's completely untrue, because actually the Republicans put pressure on the Senate to come up with something. We digged in and asked to hold the ground and, hold foreign aid, in before we get something for the border. So if we really didn't want to have anything done, we wouldn't make that as a condition. And a lot of people in the Senate were very reluctant to deal with this issue until, Republicans, many including me, start calling a lot of senators and start putting pressure on them. That's the only time Senate start working on it. But I don't think Senate really took a right approach how to do it. But regardless what it is, Senate can still pass legislation. We pass legislation. They didn't even pass legislation. Whatever the bill they had, they should have passed that bill. So I'm not sure. They talk about bipartisan, and they only had few people on the Republican side willing to vote for it. So I think, if they would pass the bill, we pass the bill, we could reconcile HR 2, but they haven't passed anything. They always blame the House into everything, but they passed nothing. And actually, they are the part, the chambers that's set up to deal with long-term policies. That's why they elected every 6 years. So I'm very open-minded to see what they pass, but so far I haven't seen it.
I do now want to pivot just a bit. You mentioned earlier in this conversation that foreign policy does continue to be a top issue for Americans. Last night, a $95 billion foreign aid bill that would support both Israel and Ukraine moved forward in a procedural vote in the Senate. If it gets to the House, is this something you would support?
I need to look at that, but I was very disappointed how we've been handling very serious war in Ukraine, how we dealt with Middle East, and really not having policy and strategy back up with actions. And our job of the Congress to make sure that we have oversight of executive branch, regardless who is in charge, Republican or Democrat. So I haven't seen what that bill is going to be. It's been, all Ukrainian aid, most it was like a slush fund for a lot of projects that President Biden has all over the world with lack of true accountability. And now when I said 2 years ago, if you're going to not be decisive in dealing with countries, we'll have more wars. And now we have more wars. And we have now serious situation in the Middle East. We have serious situation in North Africa. So I will see what is really that bill is doing, and I truly think, we would have to reconcile it and see what Republicans propose. We had some proposals, and I wish we would actually send the bill, but Speaker Johnson decided this time for them to come up with something, but I don't think it's going to pass in the way what they're moving. I haven't seen it, and we need to start thinking about how we're going to be paying, and also, why we actually pass land lease, regardless what's going to happen. Why do we, we have much more accountability and processes if we actually, instead of just giving money, but actually, they borrow from us, some other countries, including like Ukraine. I think that's a fair point. I'm not sure why President Biden, I was with him on to sign in land lease, and why would he not do it that way? It seems like it would be much better process and more accountability. I question accountability. And unfortunately, a few years ago, President Biden hasn't been very transparent with that. And this is the very serious war. It costs us money. It costs a lot of lives, and we cannot have never-ending wars, and should learn from Iraq and Afghanistan what we shouldn't be doing.
I had a really wide-ranging conversation with your colleague last week, Congressman Tim Burchett, and he called the war in Ukraine a never-ending war. He said we should cease funding to Ukraine. Do you agree? Because the foreign aid bill that I was speaking of would include $60 billion in aid for Ukraine. Do you support additional funding for Ukraine?
No, I don't look at additional. That's a lot of money, but we need to see where the funding goes. Majority packages that we will pass, and 10 to 20% go directly to weapons to Ukraine. The rest of it to go to a lot of associated causes. And unfortunately, you will not win against dictators and evil people like Putin. And they're not that dumb, just with words, blankets, only weapons and fast weapons will deter aggression further, and also will help with that. So I haven't seen them changing the strategies. Again, more and more money, and I think that is disservice also to the Ukrainian people that, that fight in a very brutal war. But we also need to remind ourselves, Ukraine was the third largest nuclear country in the world after United States and Russia, and was pushed, rightly so, to give up nuclear weapons. So if we're not dealing, with the situation there, we, UK and us and Russia signed a piece of paper giving assurances of territorial integrity. So, if we are not helping them with weapons, I think it's, play in countries like China and, and going to take advantage of the situation and say, well, you see what's, you stand with Russia, China, you'll be in a good shape. But Americans can change their minds. So I think strategically it can undermine our national interests abroad, but it's not just giving money in slush fund who knows where. So I haven't seen them in any, I do not know the details, what the Senate is moving. I haven't seen it. But if that's the same strategy, that's been failed strategy. The war escalated. The war got bigger. We haven't dealt with Ukrainian government to do better internally. And I think that's something, my frustration with this issue, because I understand the importance of us to deter now Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea teaming up against us. But we cannot be stupid, and we need to be more decisive, and we cannot have never-ending wars. That's why we need to have strategy with action that back up, and it hasn't happened.
So what you're saying is you're not against funding Ukraine more, full stop. What you're saying is, I want to see exactly where this money's going.
That's right. And more weapons going from American companies with proper oversight by Americans to actually front lines of Ukraine. Not slush fund with a lot of different causes. Listen, I'll give you one example. From aid of Ukraine, we give $1 billion to Houthis in Yemen. Okay? That was associated cause, took them off the terrorist list, President Biden gives them $1 billion, and guess what was happening? Now they're attacking our ships. and now we have a big problem there. Well, that was a great idea to do it. So we have many things that really, president been doing all over the place, just trying to be nice. Well, unfortunately, when you deal with dictators and aggressors and terrorists, being nice doesn't work. I wish it would, but it doesn't. Only, peace through strength and only through weapons works, right? And I think we didn't create deterrences before the war started. He didn't do, the slow walk the aid when the war started at the beginning, and he's been very, like on Twitter, on social media, he did grandiose statements, but didn't back up his actions, but also didn't push our allies in Europe. And that's something I'm planning to do. I'm a commissioner for European security. Europe needs to step up. This is a bigger problem for them than for us. And this is something it's a major national security problem for them. And they do a lot of talk and presentations and meetings and meetings and meetings. And they need to really do better. I mean, Germany is still not at 2%. And the country with that capabilities should be above 2%. You see what Baltics, where they are, where Poland they are, because they understand how important that fight. And Germany, is trying, but ultimately not as fast as they could in some other European allies. So we need to put pressure on them too.
I do want to talk about that while we're on the subject of foreign policy. As you know, over the weekend, I'm sure you know, former President Donald Trump made news with his NATO comments. He said he would encourage Russia to, quote, do whatever the hell they want if NATO members didn't pay more. What do you make of these comments?
Well, listen, President Trump does a lot of comments, some of them agree not. So ultimately, he's campaigning right now. I'm more curious what President Biden doing. I'll hold him accountable. But I tell you one thing, President Trump, he gets a lot of slack, but he was the first one who gave weapons to Ukraine. President, Obama gave blankets. He was the one who tried to push pressure on Germany to not be dependent on Russian gas that finances all of these wars. He actually unleashed American energy that would suppress prices that Russians cannot make so much money. And pretty much when he had a meeting with Putin, he said, under my watch, and Putin didn't move because he understood that, President Trump is serious. The same one happened in Syria. He pretty much when they start using chemical weapons, he had a serious conversation, and then, they didn't move further. So there are a lot of things in Middle East. Abraham, of course, I mean, he was very tough with a lot of foreign leaders. He does a lot of different things, what he says, right now for campaigning. But if you look at his track record, his policy were very serious, problem for countries like Russia and China, North Korea and Iran. He was really doing actions. So I care not about words, but actions. I wish we would say less words, more actions, but right now this administration is just words, and actions been very weak, and aggressors know, and Putin is not the dumb. If you listen to his interview, he might be an evil, but he's not stupid. He understands what's going on the ground, and he understands who puts actions, and I think that's something that we need to be much better and smarter. So I wouldn't worry about what he's saying. It's all campaigning now too, so I wouldn't worry about that at all.
The NATO Secretary General said that those comments, though, undermine all of our security, including that of the U.S. Do you agree, or do you think they're simply just comments that people shouldn't take into account? He is the former president, though.
Well, listen, all comments, and, he has to explain what comments and was intent of this comment. So I really don't, I don't even read it, so I don't want to really comment on something I haven't even read, But I'll tell you one thing, that NATO need to do better, and NATO hasn't been really, until recently upgrading the equipment, moving to the East front line. Now we're starting doing much more. So NATO needs to really think a little bit more seriously, because everyone is just waiting that Americans have to do everything, but we're ultimately allies and partners, and they have to do their part too. So we are not just going to, only us have to really cover the bill and all of the actions what NATO is doing. So I think there are some members of NATO that very, good at what, not just putting money where mouth is, but there are some members that have been wishy-washy. Okay, and I think they cannot just always rely that American people have to step up. We have a lot of people dying for freedoms for them in Europe. We've done a lot for Europe, and I think Americans will always stand with the freedom. But Americans want to know that, where money going, and we have a strategy, and other allies also do their part. And I would say not every allied NATO alliances is doing their part as much as they should, and it's our responsibility to put pressure on them. We will stay with NATO. I don't think, Russia will make moves against NATO, but, if we are not strong enough, Russia can find ways how they can start terrorize countries, Baltics or Poland. And if Putin said he's not going to attack NATO unless NATO attack him. Well, he said Ukraine attacked him on the eastern Ukraine, which is a complete lie. No one ever attacked him. So he can do different sabotages. He can do things that, don't underestimate hybrid warfare that Russia has been doing for many, many years and how infiltrated they are in Europe. So we have to be smarter, and NATO, instead of worrying what President Trump says, they should worry how they're going to now to deter Russia moving further and get their act together. And that's something that I hope, when we have, meetings in Munich and Vienna, my colleagues will support me to put more pressure on Europeans to do better.
Congresswoman, perhaps the largest issue over the past year and a half, 2 years, has been the economy. And I want to read you some stats really quickly and get your take on them. The S&P 500 made history last week, closing at a record high end-of-day price. The Dow Jones also traded near record highs last week, and the January jobs report was much stronger than expected. But this sentiment is not reflected at all by American voters. According to a recent Pew Research Center survey, only 28% of Americans would categorize the economy as excellent or good. So what is your economic pitch to voters?
Well, listen, let's just look at the reality, okay? We can have, CPI, which is, how it's calculated is, let's just not go there. But let's just look at the real inflation, look at the real estate prices, it's not just becoming unaffordable, it's unachievable for a lot of Americans. Prices are going up because we have inflation, which is real inflation is much higher. And what is going to do, people on fixed income, low income people, that's a tax on all of us. And why do we have inflation? Well, let's just discuss. What is 80 or something percent of money been printed in the last 10 years? I mean, we spend no end, and only there are three ways to increase the amount of money. It's print money, borrow money, or increase taxes, right? There are no other way. If we print more money, we create inflation. If we borrow money, well, we'll spend already over $1 trillion on interest. We're going to destroy our fiscal situation, and we cannot, and the debt is out of control now, and then if you increase taxes, you're going to lose the middle class. We will be working for government, but what we've been doing, which is without thoughtful process, we keep decreasing taxes and increasing spending and accumulated more and more debt. This is insanity. And now all of these funds are going bankrupt. As you know, Social Security will have 25% cut, what it's 32. Medicare is going to have cuts, 11%. Our highway funds is going to have huge cuts, automatic, if we do nothing. And no one even wants to have a discussion how it's going to hurt the people that actually rely on these programs. And runway is getting shorter and shorter. So this is becoming a problem. And then how do we keep this economy jobs? Let's just be honest. We are subsidizing with enormous amount of government money. And that's what keeps the economy afloat. The only reason it is it's looking not as bad. But in reality, we're not creating real job and GDPs where you have now pretty much government controlling such big parts of the economy and employment and everything else. Government is not the biggest innovators and movers shakers. It's not what little guy can do. And on top of it, what do they do? If you're closer to government, we now do finances through a lot of grants, government grants. Well, guess what? Who gets these grants? Who's closer to government and politicians? What about the little guy who just wants to start, his business or her business? It's very difficult to get finances. We're destroying small banking, access to capital to small businesses. So if you are an entrepreneur and a person that wants to do something, your life is getting tougher, tougher, and tougher. And now we have oligopolies controlling big parts, almost on every part of the market. That is actually, I would say that is getting more, when government controls means of production, that is actually, a pure definition of socialism by Karl Marx. And government, maybe not in the form, but in essence, controlling more and more means of production and centralizing power in DC. Very dangerous for our economy.
What's your pitch then to the everyday American, your constituent in Indiana? They're saying, hey, my bills are getting more expensive. My wallet simply can't keep up with this. What's your solution here?
Well, listen, and solutions actually not that you don't have to be genius. Just look what is driving this, what is driving this cost, right? What is driving? And if we look about it, what is driving cost of our goods? I think it's three major issues. One major issue is in our spending. That's why I fought so hard to put fiscal commission, and which we passed through budget committee. I mean, listen, I voted against Republican rules. I'd write speaker to vacate if I don't get it. I mean, I couldn't believe that I was like one woman standing, on this issue, but I'm a very determined woman, and just let's have a discussion. Listen, it's bipartisan, bicameral. Let's just have discussion where we can find common ground. And there is a lot, like in Medicare. I sent Biden, McCarthy, and Schumer a letter, 5 items, that Trump and Obama agreed on to help, to eliminate abuses in Medicare. 1.8 trillion, just 5 items. Bipartisan think tanks supported it that never wasn't allowed to do site neutrality, just a pure overbilling by large hospital monopolies of Medicare. 120 billion. Oh, they didn't want to do anything like that. So I think there is a common ground. So let's deal with fiscal issue. Let's make sure that we have Social Security that we promised to people. And we are going to think what we're going to do for young people, but let's not change, because it's very difficult for like an old age to adjust to any changes. So let's just make sure that we save Social Security for people we promise. Let's have discussion how we're going to deal with economy growth. That's another thing, so energy policy, that is the second driver. Energy policy right now, not just benefits Russia and Iran, let's just be honest, in China, but it also hurts our economy. I went to Alaska, our pipeline is at half capacity. Why? Why couldn't we try to do some more energy production and research and maybe new innovative type of energy? We might be running on fusion, in whatever, 20, 30 years, but technology is not there yet. So let's just not try to say utopian ideas, but do what is realistic right now and how we can put pressure on the people that really hurts that. So if you look at the spending, if you look at the energy, and number 3 issues is supply chain. It is very stupid for us to have 80% roughly dependency on China, regardless, if it's China or not, it's bad dependency, but communist country, it's even worse on our supply chain. So they can manipulate. When COVID happened, we saw what they were doing. There are a lot of opportunities for us to put policies that force diversification of supply chain, just bringing some transparency, and how we can then have smarter policies to invest in our domestic manufacturing, create smart domestic jobs. That will empower a lot of people. I represent big parts of community of former industrial Midwest that hurt significantly when we had bad policies and, kind of incentivized companies to move to China. It's very convenient when you don't have to follow crazy regulation. On top of it, you don't pay taxes if you invest in China. But if you invest domestically, you actually pay taxes and have a lot of regulation. Of course, companies are not stupid. So if we have a smarter policy, our fiscal policies and proper incentives, or even eliminate perverse incentives, they're going to help, and I think between, spending, healthcare, energy policy, diversifying supply chain, we can have so much ingenuity and really growth of economy, which we need to have much more vibrant, real GDP. Farming, mining, manufacturing, these are real GDP, and we kind of been really putting a lot of policies that hurt all of these 3 sectors.
Congresswoman, as we started this conversation, you are running for re-election. My last question to you, I am curious, as I'm sure you are well aware, your primary race is a crowded one. How are you standing out in the pack?
Well, listen, I have definitely a big lead, just because I've done a lot. And listen, choice is good, competition is good. We don't, not like the other sides, have coronations of kings, where it's good to have competition. It's good to have a choice. And I have a record to run on, and, and some other people, they would have to explain what the purpose they have, and that's what election's for. And ultimately, I always believe it's up to people and God. I my daughters would be pretty happy if I'm not in Congress, okay? But I know that the country is in a very difficult time, so I need to give a chance for people to have a choice if somebody cares about them, not personal agenda, and try to deliver on big issues. And I hope I'll have, from my perspective, strong allies next Congress, and hopefully strong ally for me in the White House.
Congresswoman, best of luck to you. Thank you so much for the time today. You are welcome back anytime.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.